The past 3 years have been pretty rough for the MacBook Pro. Lawsuits, emergency repair programs, a never-ending barrage of online criticism. But this right here, the new 16-inch MacBook Pro, wants to fix all of that. And I think it actually does. So let's get this out of the way first. The new 16-inch MacBook Pro is not an exciting laptop. It wasn't announced at a glitzy press event. There's not really anything innovative or forward-thinking about its design. It's really just a patch, and that's why the basics of the MacBook Pro are still intact. The unibody aluminum build quality is still one of the MacBook Pro's biggest strengths, and Apple hasn't dared touch that formula this time around, along with a lot of the other things we already loved about the MacBook Pro, like the oversized Force Touch trackpad or the Thunderbolt 3 heavy port selection. But once you get past the space gray of it all and actually dig into some of the changes that Apple has made, you'll see the evidence for an eager desire to please its fans. Now, obviously, the keyboard is the piece of the puzzle that Apple could not afford to get wrong. The controversial butterfly switches have been thrown out completely, and instead now we have this, the Magic Keyboard, which is named after the still really popular iMac accessory. The physical escape key and the inverted T arrow keys even make a glorious return here, and I know a lot of people are gonna love that. It's not a typing revolution, but I do think this new keyboard is the best Mac keyboard Apple has ever put in a laptop. It's a step up from the 2015 MacBook Pro with its larger keycaps and its kind of snappier mechanism, and obviously it's heads and tails over the butterfly mechanism keyboard. The touch bar is still not a favorite feature of mine. It hasn't really changed this time around. It's just a little bit taller to match the height of the keyboard and a little bit shorter on each side to fit in the escape key and the Touch ID. In general, I still find myself accidentally muting my music all the time and wondering why it's not more useful, but it is what it is until Apple makes any significant changes in the future. But with the extra travel in this keyboard, the chassis is a little bit thicker than the 15-inch MacBook Pro that this replaces. Only 0.03 inches, but it is noticeable. However, Apple hasn't let that space go unused. Instead, it's made some meaningful improvements to battery life and performance with that extra space. The truth is, the MacBook Pro design has always felt impossibly thin for the amount of power they were trying to deliver, especially in the 15-inch MacBook Pro. And all that might have been okay or adequate in 2016, but in the past couple years, Intel has really pushed the envelope for the amount of power they're putting into laptop processors. Specifically, I'm talking about these Core i9 processors. Unfortunately, Apple has had a pretty spotty record of putting these in the MacBook Pro. In 2018, Apple quickly threw these processors into the 15-incher, and the results were severe throttling to the point where the Core i9 was only a tiny bit faster than the Core i7, despite being quite a bit more expensive. In 2019, earlier this year, the 8-core Core i9 did a bit better in the 15-inch MacBook Pro. It was reasonably fast and a pretty big upgrade over the previous year, but it was still always a step behind the Dell XPS 15, which was significantly faster in things like video editing and content creation, which that's really important because that's what these laptops are made for. But with this, the 16-inch MacBook Pro, Apple has actually taken the time to go in and redesign the thermal so that it can actually handle these high-end laptop processors from Intel. Thinner fan blades, larger heat sinks, extra vents, the whole deal. And as it turns out, these changes make a huge difference in performance. Despite using the same 8-core Core i9 processor and 32 gigabytes of RAM, although now you can go up to 64, this MacBook Pro really does leave its predecessor in the dust in pretty much every benchmark and real-life test I could throw at it. So I loaded up a 4K 2-minute clip in Adobe Premiere and exported at ProRes 422, and it completed it in just 4 minutes and 41 seconds. Now, exporting that same clip on the 15-inch MacBook Pro earlier this year took me over twice as long. That's crazy for using the same processor. The 16-inch MacBook Pro is now up to speed with something like the XPS 15, which is really where it should have been all along. You can only imagine how fast it would be in a Mac-optimized software like Final Cut Pro. Now, there's more to these great results than just increased airflow in the system. Adobe's software optimizations probably play into it a little bit from earlier this year, as well as the new onboard graphics that Apple has included from AMD. As with all recent MacBook Pros, this guy uses a custom card from AMD. This time it's the Radeon Pro 5300M or the 5500M. These graphics aren't your standard year-to-year upgrade though. They are based on AMD's new 7nm graphics architecture, and clearly they are assisting here into turning this MacBook Pro into a powerhouse video editing machine. They definitely don't turn the MacBook Pro into a gaming laptop overnight, but really they were never meant to. With the extra thickness, Apple has also stuffed in a larger battery, which I think a lot of people will be excited to hear about. And these proposed battery improvements are really important because large laptops with big screens, especially if they're high resolution like this one, they often struggle with battery life just as the 15-inch MacBook Pro did. The slightly larger battery cells increase the juice from 83.6 to 100 watt-hours, which just happens to be the largest battery you can put on a laptop that you can legally bring onto a plane. But larger batteries don't always result in more time away from the wall socket, and in the case of the 16-inch MacBook Pro, I'm not seeing a huge improvement over the previous version. The new model didn't get me through a full 8-hour workday, although I didn't really expect it to, again, because of laptops with this many pixels it's powering. Under my standard workload, which involves dozens of tabs, streaming music in Spotify, Slack, other applications like that, I got around 5.5 hours of battery life, which, you know, doesn't get you through a full day, but it's on par with what you get in other laptops like the 4K XPS 15. Now you might be wondering, we've gone this far in the review and not mentioned the actual namesake of the device, this new 16-inch screen that Apple's put here. Now obviously it's bigger than before, but also has a higher resolution, which is great. The thing I like about it best probably is that you've got some thinner bezels on these sides finally, so it feels like a more modern laptop to actually compete with the others. But no one's gonna be surprised that Apple has put a really high quality display in its new flagship MacBook Pro. I mean, color accuracy, brightness, contrast ratio, it doesn't really matter what you measure. This is one of the best displays you can get in a laptop, which makes it great for photographers, video editors, and people who really need to trust that panel. Now, Apple's also thrown in some new microphones and some new speakers, which, like, they didn't need to do this because they already had the laptop with the best speakers, the 15-inch MacBook Pro. But these really take it a step further. Apple says that you can even hear a half octave more of bass. When you listen to this thing, when you're watching movies, listening to music, they really do sound amazing, and I really appreciate the extra effort that Apple took to actually deliver meaningful improvements to them. Now, let's talk a little bit about who this laptop is for, because the sparkle of a new MacBook Pro that fixes all the problems of the previous versions, it sounds really tempting, even for people who this laptop really is not for. If your day-to-day doesn't involve running heavy applications, you're really not gonna have much use for a 6-core, let alone an 8-core processor like the ones featured here. And, you know, that might be okay with you, but that's $1,000 of unused power, and more than that, unused money. Because remember, Apple doesn't sell these larger MacBook Pros without at least 16 gigabytes of RAM, a 6-core processor, and discrete graphics. And really, not everybody needs those things. The base configuration starts at $2399, which is over $1,000 more than the 13-inch MacBook Pro. And I get it. That smaller version doesn't have all these new upgrades, doesn't have the thin bezels and the fixed keyboard and the new thermals, doesn't have any of that. But I think it will eventually, just Apple hasn't gotten to bringing those upgrades to it yet. In the meantime, you're stuck with a pretty hard decision because, again, you might want the benefits of this new 16-inch MacBook Pro, but you don't really want to spend that much money or even really have a need for that much power. But I'd recommend either just waiting it out or looking at some of the other options in the Windows space that are significantly cheaper and have a lot of those features already included. But if you really do need this kind of power, for the first time in a few years, I can fully recommend, with a sigh of relief, this new 16-inch MacBook Pro. It's not the most exciting thing, it's not the most forward-thinking thing, but in this case, I really think Apple was smart to deliver the goods exactly how we wanted them. Hey, thanks for checking out this review. Please leave a comment below letting us know what you think of the 16-inch MacBook Pro. And specifically, I want to know what you want to do with this new laptop. What are the applications that you run that actually need this much power? Please leave a comment and then, of course, subscribe for more videos from Digital Trends.